These are the 8 essential syrups for your tropical and tiki cocktail needs. That word essential gets thrown around a lot. I do it, as does the words best, most important, top 10, ultimate, and whatever the list might be, it's catchy to use words like that or words similar to that. But these 8 essential syrups are truly essential, and it's not based on my opinion or asking around, it's based on data. It's the syrups that come up the most in these popular books, and they're some of the most popular cocktail books in this niche. So this is for real. I had a friend of the channel help me with this, and we went through 5 of the most popular books to find out which syrups were called for the most often, and the results surprised me. They surprised me quite a bit actually, but that's also why I wanted to base this video and these syrups off of these books and what is actually common and not what I just thought was common. The only caveat here is that I'm leaving off sugar syrups. Your simple syrup, your rock candy, your rich simple, your cane syrup, demerara, turbinado, brown sugar, and the likes. Now I've covered those in another video, and those are the ones that we should all pretty much know how to make. They're kind of the basics here, and these ones today will be just a little bit more advanced. But the surprising part about these essential syrups is that even if you included the simple syrup and the rich simple or the rock candy, they weren't even the 2 most popular syrups. But the most common syrup is orgeat, and then passion fruit. And that was a big surprise to me because we didn't pull from any Trader Vic's books, and Dawn the Beachcomber did not use orgeat. But it does show the popularity of the Mai Tai and all of its riffs, and the several other Trader Vic's orgeat cocktails that have been adapted. Since a bar, this is a real commercial bar, has to have orgeat to make a Mai Tai, it also makes sense to use that syrup in other cocktails as well, which is another reason we see it in so many modern cocktails. It's just always around and within arm's reach. So here are the syrups that we're gonna make today. Orgeat, passion fruit, cinnamon syrup, a honey syrup or a honey mix, ginger syrup, maple syrup, vanilla syrup, and grenadine or pomegranate syrup. Now for some of these syrups, I've done longer videos, kind of deep dives into how to make those, and I'll point out to those videos and share links in this episode's description, and then right up here when those videos come up. If you want more details on those recipes, instead of me spending 10 plus minutes on every single syrup here today. Now, all of the syrups today I'll be making are either a 2-to-1 syrup that's 66 Brix or a 1-to-1 syrup, which is 50 Brix. 2-to-1 syrups will last you longer than a 1-to-1, but there's no uniform consensus as to what should be 2-to-1 and what should be 1-to-1. Now, I base my syrups on other recipes and books, and I try to replicate what shows up the most often. It also depends on what ingredient is making that syrup flavorful. If it's a juice or fruit like passion fruit or grenadine, I like it to be a 1-to-1 syrup because if it's a 2-to-1, that means more sugar and less of the fruit. And since it's sweeter, you'll need less of that syrup in the cocktail. Or something that gets its flavor from a spice or an extract, like let's say vanilla, cinnamon, or orgeat, you can make those 2-to-1 and still get plenty of flavor from that spice or that ingredient. So there's no real rule as 2-to-1 versus 1-to-1. Now, I will also be making everything by weight, for the most part, which I know many of my fellow Americans have an aversion to, but if you want to make some or all of these syrups that you're going to see here today, you're going to be saving a lot of money from buying these syrups. You should take a little bit of that savings and get yourself a cheap kitchen scale. You should be able to find one for under $10. For the amounts of each syrup I'm making today, they will vary a lot, and it's pretty much based on the bottle size that I usually use. Now, here's a tip when making these syrups, or pretty much any syrup if you want to make a certain volume or fit a particular bottle size. Sugar and water will weigh more than just water. So if you want to make, let's say, 750 milliliters of syrup and fit it into a 750 milliliter bottle, you wouldn't take 750 and divide it by 3 and then take 500 grams of sugar and 250 grams of water or another liquid, because that would not yield you 750 milliliters. It would be a lot less, since sugar is denser than water. Instead, take what you want your final volume to be. Let's say it's 750 milliliters of a 2-to-1 syrup. Multiply that by 1.33 and use that number in grams to make your syrup. That might yield at you a tiny bit more than 750, but it will be close, and you can multiply any volume size by 1.33 to guide you. If you're making a 1-to-1 syrup, then you would multiply by 1.23. Now, this is info I figured out myself, and I've seen other numbers online on places like Reddit that are not accurate. I've tested this, I've used a graduated cylinder, but these are all my measurements from when I've tested this. So let's start with the most essential syrup, which is Orgeat. This recipe is a 2-to-1 or 66 Brix. I make Orgeat using an almond milk concentrate, sugar, almond extract, rose water, and orange blossom water. The process to make this is super easy, and I've done 2 videos exploring this on a deeper level, with the most recent one I just shared within the last few weeks being my standard recipe, and probably and hopefully I'm going to keep it that way forever. I start by making almond milk, and I do it this way because this almond milk has 5 times more almonds than even your fancy store-bought brands. Then I filter it through a coffee filter, but this step is totally optional. My yield here is 200 grams of almond milk, so I double that in sugar and then add in 1.5 teaspoons of almond extract, 1.5 teaspoons of rose water, and 1.5 teaspoons of orange blossom water. Now those ratios for almond extract, rose water, and orange blossom water are 1/4 teaspoon for 100 grams of syrup, but you can always start lower than that and add more as needed or to your preference. And this bottle size is 450 milliliters, and that's why you saw me making 600 grams of syrup. The second most called for syrup is passion fruit syrup, and mine is 50 Brix or a 1-to-1 syrup, and I like to use these frozen pieces. Many people have commented that they've seen these at Walmart for just about $4. I don't have those at the Walmart near me, and the Whole Foods carries these for twice the price, but I still think it's worth it. I've also seen these at Sprouts. You'll need a scale for this, and all I do is weigh out some passion fruit, and then take that number, multiply it by 0.87, and add that much in sugar. I found from making this several times that that will give you a 50 Brix or 1-to-1 syrup. There's sugar in the passion fruit, which is why I'm not making this with equal parts passion fruit to sugar. Passion fruit syrup does not need to be blended, just whisk it together and it's ready to go. And in these syrup videos, I talk a lot about Brix, and to measure that, I use this, which is a refractometer. These are not necessary, but if you want to make your own fruit syrups or adjust other syrups to be exact, these are pretty handy. Now, not all are created equally, and they'll have different ranges. This one, I believe, goes up to 85 Brix, and it covers everything that I need. But one that goes to 35 Brix would not work. They measure how much light is bent through a prism, and they'll tell you how much sucrose there is in a solution by degrees Brix. Now that sounds a little bit complicated, especially if you've never heard of this, but it's pretty simple. 1 degree Brix is equal to 1 gram of sucrose in 100 grams of a solution. So what we might call a simple syrup is half sugar and half water. That's 50 Brix. It's 50% sugar by weight. Now that's not volume. And that's why we can't just say something is 50% sugar, because you could be referring to volume instead of weight. And by using a scale, you can use other sugars, even a homemade powdered sugar, and you'll have much more consistency. But from time to time today and in other recipes, you might see me calling for ounces or teaspoons because those work well in small measurements, and I'm also a dumb American. And while we use cups and pints, quarts, ounces, you might find that all confusing. Like, what is this black magic? How do we remember the conversions for each one? We don't. We actually never learn those things, at least not that we can remember. So we just ask Google to help us. Now, the next syrup we're going to make is cinnamon syrup. And I had been making my syrups a long time, just following different recipes, and they all worked fine. But now I somewhat follow the tropical standard recipe because it is great, and it calls for cassia cinnamon, which I had not used in my syrups before I was following their recipe. Now you can find it on Amazon, and if there's something that I use today for any of these syrups, I'll add links to those in the episode description. Now the book calls for a 1-to-1 syrup, but today I'm going to make mine a 2-to-1 syrup because I found cinnamon just keeps a really long time in the refrigerator, and this will last even longer than a 1-to-1. Plus other recipes that you come across, like from the Smuggler's Cove book, are 2-to-1 ratio. I start by toasting the cinnamon on low heat for a couple of minutes. Add in the water, and then the sugar, simmer on low, covered for 15 minutes. Now I'll remove it from the heat and I'll let it cool. Once cool, I'll transfer to another container to sit overnight. And finally, I'll strain it. And I really like this cassia cinnamon syrup. It's intense, but it's not too intense so it holds up in cocktails but doesn't overpower it. Next up, it's honey syrup, and this is going to be a 1-to-1 syrup or 50 Brix. Now the category of a honey syrup is a pain because there is no uniformity between recipes. Some call for 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, and some call to use straight honey. Honey syrup or honey mix is called for because it's easier to use in a bar setting. It pours easier, and if you use straight honey, that will get left behind in your jigger and it will throw off the measurements for future things that you measure in that jigger. The problem with all honey syrups is they generally do not specify the honey to be used, and they do not account for the Brix levels of honey, which is variable even for the same kind of honey. Now, in my opinion, for consistency, we should all be using a generic clover honey. You can do whatever you want to, but if you want something that translates to the most amount of cocktails, basic honey is what we're looking for. Now, honey is not the same universally when it comes to Brix. They can range from 70 to 88 Brix, according to the internet. This means cutting that with water by whatever ratio can yield very different results. And if we often see a rich 2-to-1 honey syrup, that's 2 parts honey to 1 part water, but honey is not the same as sugar. It's not 100% sucrose. So by using a 2-to-1 ratio, you don't end up with a rich honey syrup that is 66 Brix. It's less. This honey that I use is from Costco and it's 76.5 Brix. Now this is honey from Trader Joe's and it's 78 Brix. To complicate things more, honey tastes sweeter than sugar. Now sweetness is something that we perceive, so 66 Brix of a honey syrup is not giving the same level of sweetness as a 66 Brix rich simple syrup. Yeah, we are getting kind of deep into the weeds here today with some of this stuff. Now to standardize things for myself, I just use the 50 Brix syrup for everything. I do this because it's easier for me and it translates to more recipes this way. Now I had been using trial and error to get to a 50 Brix solution. I would add water to honey and keep checking it on the refractometer until it equaled 50 Brix. But the Tropical Standard book included some formulas that I then put into a spreadsheet to do this, which makes it much easier. It tells me exactly how much sugar or water I need to add to something to increase or decrease the Brix, and I've been using that for the syrups that I've been sharing here today. Now for this honey, I'm going to take 100 grams of it and I'm going to add in 56 grams of water to lower it to 50 Brix. And if you hate metric and refuse to weigh things, if you make a honey syrup with this honey by using 2 parts honey to 1 part water, you'll end up with something that is around 50 Brix, but it won't be exact. But it might be close enough for you. But to reiterate, a 2-to-1 ratio honey syrup is not the same as a 2-to-1 rich simple syrup. 2-to-1 honey will be close to the same as a 1-to-1 simple syrup. I know, it's complicated. Next is ginger syrup, which is the weakest link of all of my syrups. It's the one that I don't need very often and it goes bad faster than most. I make ginger syrup by taking an ounce of ginger juice and adding it to 100 grams of a 2-to-1 rich simple syrup. That will give me a syrup that is right around 50 Brix. I use 1 ounce because it turns out that 1 ounce added to 100 grams of a 2-to-1 syrup just happens to lower the Brix levels from 66 Brix to 50. It's just kind of a happy coincidence and I got lucky there. And the reason I do this way is because I also freeze the ginger juice into ice cubes that are 1 ounce. So then when I need to make a syrup, I can use a rich simple syrup that I always keep on hand at 1 frozen ginger juice ice cube. Now this ginger syrup got its own video from me somewhat recently, so I'll leave a link in the episode description and I'll put one up right here as well. Next is my favorite syrup to make, and that's maple syrup, and it's very easy. Just go buy maple syrup, grade A or whatever you prefer, but you want to make sure it's real maple syrup. Just take the label off and it will look even cooler on camera. Next up is one of my favorite syrups, and it's vanilla syrup, and this is a 2-to-1 ratio or 66 Brix. I make my vanilla syrup a little bit different than I've seen anyone else do it, and that's because I just love vanilla, so I use vanilla beans, vanilla paste, and vanilla extract. It's not necessary, but I want vanilla flavor that has a broad flavor. In a saucepan, I'm going to add 200 grams of water, 400 grams of sugar, and our vanilla beans that have been cut up. gonna bring it to a simmer and then just turn off the heat and cover it for 15 minutes. When it's cooled down, I'll add in the vanilla extract as well as the vanilla paste. And then I'll pour it into a bottle. And finally, the 8th most essential syrup for tropical and tiki cocktails is Grenadine or pomegranate syrup. The one I'm gonna make is 50 Brix, that's a 1-to-1 syrup. Now, most recipes will tell you to just go to the store and buy some Pom Wonderful juice and add some sugar, which you can do, but using fresh pomegranate juice is magical. It is bright and rich, and it's unlike the pomegranate juice you can find in the store. Now, the syrup and method that I'm using today is something I swear by, and it's much better than any other recipe I've seen online. I also make larger batches and then freeze the syrup because it can be challenging to make. Now, this exact recipe comes from the Tropical Standard book, so I follow their recipe. The only thing I change is that when pomegranates are not in season, like right now, and most of the time, I buy the pre-packaged pomegranate arils or seeds. It's also just easier this way. It's probably a little bit more expensive, but if you can't find pomegranates, it's the best thing to do. This means we need to juice these, and that can be messy. But if you have a juicer like this one, then you can juice basically anything. And it can be messy, so use a towel or some paper towels to put over your juicer to make sure it doesn't get everywhere.
So yes, I am back to using the spreadsheet here, but you don't have to do this unless you're looking to be exact. But if you do want to be exact with fruit juices, you need to check their Brix first to determine their sugar level so you know how much sugar to add. And since pomegranate juice is variable, I can test it on the refractometer and then add it to the spreadsheet to get the exact amount of sugar I need to raise it to 50 Brix. But don't worry if you don't want to go through those steps, because I will leave a recipe in this episode's description that includes the exact amounts of juice and sugar for a more generalized recipe. We're also going to add in some citric acid.
I don't have any right now, but you do want to add 2 orange twists here. It does make a big difference to get that orange oil into your pomegranate grenadine. Now, someone asked me a question the last time I did this, if you can just blend the pomegranate arils, and I tried that. And I then ran it through a strainer, and surprisingly, it got less yield than using the juicer, and it also made it cloudy, but it tasted just fine. The number one question people will ask is how long will these last? And the only correct answer that I can give you is I don't know. And don't listen to anyone online that tells you how long syrup lasts. Your conditions are not the same as mine or someone else's, your refrigerator temperature, the placement of the syrup in your refrigerator. How often do you open the door? Do you leave it out? Do you sanitize your bottles? If it's in a book that you know and respect, you can usually trust it. If it's in a video or a blog post online, don't trust it. Just be smart, check them. If you think they're bad, throw them away. Adding a splash or 2 of vodka or a high-proof spirit may make it last longer, but I've never seen or been presented with any science behind that. And I tend not to trust it until someone can show me some proof. It's like an old wives' tale to me. Most liqueurs that are shelf stable are well over 10% ABV, and to make these over 10% ABV, that's a lot of vodka. But if you want to make things last longer, just freeze them. For a long time, I was using Ziploc bags, which are good, but for me, there's no point having or saving all these syrups if I don't know where to find them. So recently I switched over to these cheap glass bottles with swing top. This way I'll never lose the lid. They're square, so you can fit a little bit more in the freezer as well. But if you do this, make sure that you let the contents of the bottle freeze in your freezer first with the lid open and coming back to it later to close the lid, or you'll break your bottles, which I've done. Most of these syrups will not harden in the freezer anyways. I also like to use these little leftover water bottles, as they hold a nice amount, about 8 ounces I think for this exact one, and you can squeeze out the air before popping them into the freezer. Plus if they break, there's no broken glass. So that is it. 8 essential syrups for your tropical and tiki cocktail needs. If you go watch that other video I did on the simple syrups, if you do that, you'll have 11 syrups that are pretty much going to cover almost everything you're going to need, outside of a few specialty ones that are usually just for a cocktail or two. But this will get you pretty much the most use out of those popular books. So a big thank you to Billy for helping me on this and organizing everything to basically give a foundation here. Like, what are the syrups that are called for the most often? Because I think most of the time in the past, people were just guessing, but now we know, at least in those books, these are the ones that you need the most often. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like below. Consider subscribing to this channel. If you want to support this channel more, go check out the Patreon page, and otherwise, see you on the next one.